it down to being editorial. That's what he just told me.
Oh. Well, if I knock myself out, you know, to come.
And we have changed the order of events in that after Carolyn has introduced Mr. Indiana, the mayor, and I think, Bob, if you two could maybe come up and assist in bringing
Pull on the sheet.
Bob down.
I just think it's a shame that we can't have another opportunity.
That's fine.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
That's fine. Carolyn, it's,
Okay.
I think it's on. You might say hello one time.
Hello?
Yes.
Fine. Welcome. Welcome to your new city hall, your seat of city government, your new home. Isn't it beautiful? We're going to begin with a minute of silent prayer that each of us might thank God in his or her own way for the many blessings we enjoy in Columbus, Indiana, for this beautiful building, for the generous contributors to the art, and for the painting that we're going to unveil today. Today, we are here to mark another milestone in the traditions of Columbus, Indiana. To mark the tradition of our continuing commitment to the enhancement of the quality of our life. To mark the tradition of the collaboration of art and architecture. Although this is not a newer tradition, a tradition that stems from the Greeks and the Romans, it's a well-established tradition here in Columbus, as evidenced by our large arch in front of the IMP Library, the Sermon on the Mount at the First Christian Church, and Chaos 2 at the Commons. Today we are marking another step in that direction. We are also marking another tradition, for how could we not mention the success of the Hard Hat Ball? This is based on a grassroots tradition, a tradition of community involvement and support for many projects that enrich our lives here. The success of the Hard Hat Ball was built on the foundations of previous successful projects, which brings to our mind the success of the North High School Gymnasium and the way the community worked together to build our new gym. The clearing of Millrace Park, and the way we worked together to have a significant centennial project, the Highway 46 beautification. The success of the Hard Hat Ball was the culmination of the dedication and hard work of a great number of people, too numerous to mention. They did a superb job, and didn't we have a ball? And today we have our painting, our park, our trees, and our gym. Underlying all these successes is another tradition, a feeling of identity, pride, and of belonging to our community. a tradition of the acknowledgement of having received much from our town, Columbus, Indiana, and of a willingness to give of ourselves in return. Our first speaker today is a prime example of that tradition. He is a native of Columbus, Indiana, was a promising art student in high school, studied at the University of Cincinnati, has taught art at the secondary level, was curator of the Cincinnati Museum of Contemporary Art, and is an expert on graphics and has written a book on that subject. He is well respected and highly regarded in the art world. He is director of art at the Chase Manhattan Bank, and the Chase owns the largest corporate art collection of art in the world. When asked to help us initiate an art project for City Hall, Jack Bolton said, "Of course I would like to do something for my hometown." And Jack has done something for his hometown and has contributed significantly to this art project. And with that, I introduce Jack Bolton.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good afternoon, and indeed it's a great pleasure to be here, and I would like to, from the dais, acknowledge with gratitude my biographer, Edna Thayer, who recently presented me so nicely to the community. One of the thoughts we had as we sat over a year ago talking about art for City Hall was how to sort of correctly appoint a building of this caliber. One of the thoughts we had was to think about artists from Indiana, again, people who were born here. And today brings sort of the first round, and one that gives me great pleasure to see completed, a work of art by Robert Indiana. Certainly his imagery historically, whether it was his painting The American Dream that was acquired by the Museum of Modern Art, or the basketball court for the Milwaukee Bucks. There's a kind of iconography that transcends all of that rhetoric of high art and access by a population. And what more appropriate, almost in a kind of medieval heraldic way, that we were able to commission him to do a painting for our City Hall. And I'm, in this day of global technology and communications, one thinks of Buckminster Fuller and Marshall McLuhan as we celebrate a city hall and a sense of city, when in fact national, state, international boundaries seem to be shrinking, disappearing, and reoccurring. But I think it's most fitting to, and I hope you will agree, I had a sneak preview last evening of the picture, and that it really represents that kind of civic pride and symbol that is so inherent in his work and so appropriate for this new building. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. The question has been asked of me many times: how does a selection committee select an artist? What are the criteria? Let me tell you, it's not easy, but we did set up some criteria. Criteria was we needed a well-known contemporary artist whose work would be aesthetically compatible to this beautiful building. An artist with a broad base appeal to the people of the community, whose work would not be offensive or outrageous. And at Chuck Bassett's suggestion, a famous Indiana artist. And through Jack Bolton's very excellent research, we learned there were many very famous Indiana artists. Among them was one, although born in Newcastle, Indiana, had lived in 21 places in Indiana, had grown up and spent a part of his childhood in Elizabethtown, just a few miles from here, and when he was in the United States Air Force, Columbus, Indiana was his hometown. He is an internationally recognized artist, described as the most American of all American artists. His paintings and sculptures are owned by 25 museums, all the way from San Francisco to Denmark. And his printings and drawings are owned by 115 museums around the world. An artist who, in addition to having his Master of Arts degree from Edinburgh University, holds not one, but 3 honorary doctoral fine arts degrees. An artist best known for his love painting and sculpture, both at the Indianapolis Museum. A famous man who refers to Columbus as his hometown. It would only seem appropriate that one of his paintings should reside here in our new City Hall. Robert Indiana has personally driven this painting all the way from Vinyl Haven, Maine, to be here today to share with you his thoughts about his painting. Now, at his request, we are changing the order of the program a bit, and we are going to unveil the painting that when he describes it to you, you may all sit there and look at it. So we will do.
Thank you very, very much, Caroline and Mayor Brown and Jack. I did have a good night's sleep last night, and it was the first night's sleep that I've had in about 4 days. I drove the painting straight through, stopping only for an hour or two of sleep on the road in a U-Haul van. I was carrying not only the painting for City Hall, but also the graphic show, which is at the Commons now. I was forced into this situation because I don't know whether it's something in my Hoosier makeup or background or character or what, but I'm a procrastinator. And things tend to get put off to the end. This is happens to be, and I want to say this for several reasons, this is a very fresh, just born painting. It is still wet, and it had to be put into a very special box so that when it was lowered into the crate and then of course lifted out of the crate here, no surface would be touched by a human hand. And my helper on the island, who had never done this before, didn't know the complications, and that was part of the thing that made me late in arriving here. But I might also say that, like sculpture, this is one of those things. Please do not touch for a long, long time, you see. Otherwise you'll have pink fingers. Pretty much as I think everybody knows about the fact that I don't call Columbus my hometown really, because neither do I call my birthplace my hometown. I think I was in Newcastle for all of about 30 minutes. Indianapolis was really my home, and it is there that I went to school, and it is there that I lived in 21 different houses before I was the age of 17, because my mother couldn't bear to live in one house for more than a year at a time. And it is, of course, that place which is most important in my life, because my most important work until now has been displayed at the Indianapolis Museum, and that is the large love sculpture. I'm going to switch things around. I had a certain order of comments that I was going to make, but it seems, since we're talking about Indianapolis, The biggest challenge here was, well, what should this painting depict? What should it contain? And of course, many things comes to mind with Columbus. It certainly is a city of beautiful churches, and that comes to mind, one of the very first C's. But also lots of schools which don't have anything to do with sea at all. But to single out a silhouette of one of the churches didn't seem fair. Mayor Brown told me that I definitely should not use the tower of the courthouse because that's something else. And even Henry Moore's sculpture, which is probably my favorite Henry Moore in this country. After all, it is Henry Moore, and I'm Robert, Indiana, and I think we'll leave the Moore over there. So therefore, I had to come to the sea, and it occurred that if I had been in Indianapolis, I would have had even a more difficult challenge, because Indianapolis, the letter I, except for my own taken name, is much more restrictive. I'd have to deal with all kinds of abstractions like imagination and initiative and independence and inventiveness, and that's not really what my work is about. My work is much more tangible and much more connected with real things and things which have meant something to me. And so the letter C seemed to be that which I had to deal with, and certainly the most appropriate, because of all the places I know, letter C than any other. Many things come to mind. First of all, I was a C when I called Columbus home myself. I was Robert Clark at that time, and my home was out on McKinley, and I was a soldier in the Air Force, and it was here that my mother died in 1949 during my last year in the Air Force. I came back to Columbus to see her on leaves while she was ill. And of course, my mother's name is a C. This was Carmen, and of course she was a Clark at one time, but when she was here her name was Carmen Dickey. And it was out on McKinley at my mother and stepfather's donut shop that I painted my very first sign that I ever painted in my life. That's long since disappeared. Another C that comes to mind is the C of a very prominent family. I've never met a Crump, but the very last theater that I ever took my mother to, the last movie that she saw, oddly enough, The Boy with the Green Hair was the name of the film, was at the Crump Theater. Of course, one of the main reasons that I'm standing here is simply the Cummins Engine Company, in the person of the Mr. and Mrs. Miller, who unfortunately aren't here now, but they did come in last night for a sneak preview before the painting was hung. They have seen it, and they did seem very genuinely pleased with the result. And of course, I'm sure that much of all of this would never have happened if it had not been for the Cummins Engine Company and what the Millers have done for the city. But it brings to mind another C, and this is the C of a person who is one of the most important people in my life, someone who moved my own career ahead considerably. And this happens to be another native of Columbus by some incredible coincidence, and that's Carl Weinhardt, who was formerly the director of the Indianapolis Museum, and I used the C of his first name. His grandfather had a jewelry store here in Columbus, or maybe it still exists, and just by chance, when my father bought his wedding ring, or engagement and wedding ring for my mother, it came from Carl Weinhardt's grandfather's jewelry store, the branch in Indianapolis, the Ross Jewelry. All of those things mean something to me. It makes no difference at all in relation to the painting that will be here every day, probably now for a long, long time. But there are some C's which are more important and come to mind. I crossed Pennsylvania and I crossed Ohio in the night, and I found myself on the border, so that when I got up to make the final drive here, the very first thing I saw in the morning was all the cornfields. And of course, if one is a Hoosier and if one goes away and lives someplace else, in Maine we don't have very many cornfields, and it doesn't look very good anyway. Corn obviously played a very, very important part in Columbus's early history. I think of the Cerealine Company, which is about to be restored now. And of course, because I was a Latin student at Tech in Indianapolis I took 4 years of Latin, Ceres certainly comes to mind, the goddess of the grain. So that's why you happen to have a yellow C. Now, other things are particularly tied to the immediate situation, as you can see from the painting. I think it's an absolutely beautiful building, and I wanted to reflect the architecture in what hopefully may become the seal for your city, and I had that very much in mind when I designed this. The broken lintel of the atrium's courtyard, it never occurred to me except yesterday when I drove in. I came down 65 and across 40. I didn't remember how high the Christian church's bell tower stood in the air. But of course, these two architectural features are really that bell tower turned horizontal. The proportion is exactly the same as the bell tower. And as a young person here, of course, that was the first modern building that I had ever seen or ever knew. And the colors, I tried to reflect, of course, that beside the white of the interior, there is this particular rose color for the carpeting that leads right up to the painting, which seems to make a nice connection and transition. The broken lintel and the circular aspect where the letters are placed, someone very nicely sent me a piece of one of these bricks, and so I had that to base the kind of tan color that is behind the letters. The green, of course, after all, this is a very green state, and just visually, that is what one does see below this particular piece of architecture. Otherwise, it is the, as I told Xenia Miller, the little flowers of Indiana there in the grass. I think it was marigolds when I came back, but I would like to think of those as rose-colored zinnias, because when I left Indiana, it was still the state flower. The other C that comes to mind in relation to abstractions, the one that occurs here is that it took a lot of courage on Columbus's part, I think, to choose a native son who went away to become a pop artist. And I'm very grateful and I'm very pleased that I was chosen to do this. Thank you.
What a treasure of an explanation, and to think we have it on TV and on tape. It's marvelous. Busy, on the go, dynamic, just returned from Europe, where she was our ambassador in Zurich to promote Columbus to an European industrialist. Quite well recuperated from her jet lag. Our next speaker is our own mayor, Nancy Ann Brown.
Thank you. What a nice event to come back to. Mr. Indiana, we are so very pleased to have this contribution to the art for Columbus City Hall. an artist who grew up in our own area, who went out to seek his way in life and has now returned to his hometown to add something to its heritage. On behalf of the community, I thank you so very much. We have chosen this placement so that all who come to this building will be able to see this work of art and share in your thoughts as you created this piece. However, I am happy with the placement for still another reason. As I approached the intersection of Washington and 2nd Street last night, and I turned on 2nd Street, I could see the reflection of this painting play across the front of this wide expanse of wall glass. Each reflection gave a small glimpse, but not the total look at the painting. And even though you cannot see the picture from the street, the glimpse in the window is beautiful and the many reflections exciting. Once again, on behalf of myself and the committee and the community, I accept this for the City of Columbus, Indiana, and I thank you very much. While I have the mic, I would like to also extend a few other thanks to many people who have contributed, and there is no way we can name them all, so I'm going to hit as many of the highlights as I can. First of all, the Art Selection Committee, which was made up of Chuck Bassett, our architect for the building, Donna Ari from the Indianapolis Museum of Art, Jack Bolton from Columbus, who is currently Vice President of Art for the Chase Manhattan Bank in New York, Xenia Miller, the past President of the Indiana Arts Commission, also of course from Columbus, and our own hardworking councilman, Carolyn Lickerman, who, without this Carolyn, she took hold of this project, she made sure things got done, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you. There were some other people who were working on this, and the people who do the thinking always get all the credit, but the people who do the work sometimes we forget. So I would like to mention a few of those also. The Art Advisory Committee, made up of Betty Brown, Marion Dietrich, Natalie Fairhead, Frank Forrester, Pat Spurlock, Larry Heyerdahl, Christine Lemley, Carolyn Lickerman, Bill Mitchell, and Jim Smith. And also the Hard Hat Ball Committee, which Carolyn mentioned earlier, Max Andrus, Marion Dietrich, Frank Forrester, Susan Nash, Herschel O'Shaughnessy, John and Carol Rumpel, John and Jane Sohn, John and Joanne Spangler, and Robert and Barbara Stewart. All of those people worked very, very hard. But most of all, I want to give a great, huge thanks to all of you who participated in this event through your generous donations. Without you, we would not be here today. Also, I would like to give thanks to Karen Lyon, who played the piano as we were beginning our program today. Now, as Carolyn said, I've been out of town, and I returned with sort of mixed emotions. I found out that things got done while I was away. I don't know if they can get along without me, or if I just hired very good people and that they see they get the job done. And I'd like to believe the latter. So I would like to thank Carolyn, of course, and Tom Clerkin, who put this program together and planned it and saw that things got done regardless of who was here. Also, I'd like to thank Tom and Bill Mitchell, Pat Spurlock, Kathy Smith, and Carolyn for being here last night and to make sure that this picture was hung properly and ready for display today. And of course, a special thanks to Mr. Indiana, who drove from his home in Maine to Columbus to personally deliver this picture. Thank you very much, and thank you all.
Again, thank you all for coming. There are refreshments prepared by Jim Gregory, and they will be served in the main meeting room. The building is open. You are free to tour and to see all the rooms if you haven't been here before. And please come and take a close